a number of Omaha and Oto Indians and some few others who in different groups looked at us with much curiosity. All these people were wrapped in buffalo skins with the hairy side outwards. A few only had aquiline noses and their eyes were seldom drawn down at the corners.
These journal observations by Maximilian and Bodmer's watercolors and aquatints are of critical importance to contemporary Native American people in order to preserve and sometimes even reconstruct aspects of their traditions.
One of the things in the Omaha culture we've been trying to do is go back and document some of our earlier history and to try to look at what we have maintained today as a measurement of how much has been lost of the culture.
After the father first daubed him with vermilion paint, Mr. Bodmer made a sketch of the man's son.
The Omaha boy, for instance, looking at the Klan haircut, how he wore his robe. I think this is a part of the history that the Omaha people don't really know about.
The Omaha tribal organization included 10 distinct kinship groups, each with its own ritual obligations. The boy's hair was cut in this specific fashion to identify him as belonging to one of these groups and to impress upon the child and his playmates their kinship affiliations.
These kinds of paintings show the people a glimpse of the past to have some sort of pride and dignity within themselves.
The Indians assembled around our house and at the request of Mr. Cabernet performed a dance. About 20 Omahas joined in it. The principal dancer wore on his head a feather cap composed of a long tail and wing feathers of owls and birds of prey. He had a martial appearance, to which his athletic figure greatly contributed.
In the diaries, it talked about the Omaha dance, the Omaha Heyalushka dance. The dance itself was a dramatization of a war event or a battle event. It was acting it out to some artistic form.
Today's Helushka society is still a warrior society, with virtually the entire group comprised of military veterans. The Omahas date their annual powwow from the time of Maximilian's visit.
As a historian, I think the diaries and the paintings is a tremendous treasure to the Indian people. In this time and this age, going back to their history and their culture, to see some great value in their culture.
On the 5th of May, the Yellowstone left Cabernet's trading house. We had been on the Missouri exactly 4 weeks since we left St. Louis. The character of the country was much changed. It is for the most part naked and without woods. The green hills of the prairie approach very near the water. Trees which are found here are no longer lofty and vigorous as on the lower Missouri. Here we saw on the spine of one of the hills a burial place on poles, which was that of a Sioux Indian who had been killed by lightning in a violent thunderstorm. A little further up the river, we saw on the hills other burying places. Most of them were formed of a high platform on 4 stakes on which the corpse, sewn up in skins, lies at full length.
In the aquatint version of the burial scaffold, the tranquility of Bodmer's image is enhanced by the luxuriant foliage, but with the dramatic counterpoint of prowling wolves. Maximilian and Bodmer continued upriver to Fort Pierre. Named for Pierre Chouteau, Jr., manager of the American Fur Company, the fort was one of the largest settlements on the entire Missouri. It was the primary trading post for the Sioux Nation and was visited by other Plains tribes.
One of the most esteemed men among the Sioux was Vakta Gailey, called Gallant Warrior. Mr. Bodmer expressed the wish immediately upon the arrival of gallant warrior to paint his portrait at full length. So he appeared in his complete state dress. On his head, he wore long feathers of birds of prey, which were tokens of his warlike exploits, particularly of the enemies he had slain, and on his breast, the great medal from the President of the United States. The fringe on his shirt is human hair said to come from a Mandan foe. He was a patient subject posing for 2 days with only occasional interruptions to smoke from his pipe tomahawk. Like all North American Indians, they highly prize personal bravery and therefore constantly wear the marks of distinction which they have received for their exploits. He who in the battle touches a slain or a living enemy, called counting coup, places a feather horizontally on his hair for this exploit.
This Sioux, named Woman of the Crow Nation, suggesting a kinship with that tribe, wears a dress fringed with twisted metal cones, or tinklers, at the hem, which would make a musical sound as she walked. Her summer robe, made of buffalo hide with all the hair removed to make it lighter, is decorated in an elaborate geometric pattern called a box and border style. Maximilian purchased a woman's robe much like this one. Box and border robes were popular on the Central Plains, particularly among the Sioux. They were most frequently called women's robes and usually were worn by women. However, Bodmer depicted an Assiniboine chief draped in a buffalo robe with a quite similar box and border design. His hair is tinted with red clay, and he is wearing a grizzly bear claw necklace, popular with the tribes along the upper Missouri.
I was particularly struck with one Assiniboine on account of his headdress. He wore across his head a leather strap to each side of which a horn was fixed, and between them black feathers cut short. The horns, which were cut out of an antelope, had at their point a tuft of horsehair dyed yellow.
Maximilian made copious notes in his journals about the things that he saw and he collected. Maximilian was a dedicated scientist and an absolutely inveterate collector. On his earlier expedition to South America, he collected literally thousands of specimens of flora and fauna in Brazilian cultures. He even extended that to include an individual. He took back to Germany with him a Botocudo native. He continued the same pattern, of course, of systematic collecting when he went to North America, and he was very thorough. He collected a lot. For example, in Pennsylvania, in 1 month, he had 5 crates ready to ship home, and there were 170 birds and 43 turtles, and about 40 or 50 snakes, and roughly 40 frogs and toads. When he began to encounter American Indians, he began to collect American Indian artifacts, clothing, utensils, weapons. Everything interested him, and he collected everything. Another thing that makes Maximilian's collection very special is that it is documented. Virtually everything that he collected, he wrote about, and he wrote about it copiously in his journals. Maximilian's artifacts also lend credence to the realism of Bodmer's watercolors. When we see how faithfully Bodmer reproduced the details of a known club, it increases our confidence in his portrayal of objects that no longer exist. Quite aside from what Maximilian collected, Bodmer's pictures let us see how ornaments or clothing of all kinds might have been worn, or what place an object might have occupied in a household. They are informative, historical documents that tell us a great deal about the material culture of the Plains Indians 150 years ago. But because we know whose lodge this was, who wore this robe, what kind of musician this man was, they do far more than that. They have a much more human meaning. They remind us that material culture was made and used not by some vague generic tribesmen, but by persons. In a very real way, Bodmer's images remind us of something else. The Mandan, like many other Plains tribes, called themselves in their own language, the people. And Bodmer's pictures remind us very vividly that they were.
Maximilian, Bodmer, and Drydoppel had arrived at Fort Union, the trading base with the Assiniboines, the end of June 1833, having taken 75 days to get there from St. Louis. In July, they pressed upriver to Fort Mackenzie, then the most remote of the outposts on the Missouri, founded only a year earlier. The party embarked on the 60-foot-long keelboat Flora for the last leg of the journey, a year and 2 days since they had arrived on the American continent. The landscape underwent a dramatic change as the keelboat entered the Mauvais Terre, the Badlands.
This brought us to a remarkable place. On the mountain of the south bank, there was a thick, snow-white layer of sandstone, which had been partly acted upon by the waters. At the end, where it is exposed, being intersected by the valley, 2 high pieces in the shape of buildings had remained standing. We agreed to give these original works of nature the name of the White Castles.
A bit further upriver, the party encountered a large band of Atsina, or Gros Ventre, who besieged the Flora, demanding gifts or trade items.
I found out that at the mouth of the Arrow River, in 1832 or 33, the ship going up the Missouri landed and met a huge camp of my people, the Gros Ventre of the prairies. And there, Carl Bodmer met some of our great men. They said they were brave and hardy, feared they'd burned some forts in Canada.
Our situation was anything but agreeable, for these were the same Indians who had demolished a fort on the frontiers of Canada 2 years before. They'd killed a clerk and 18 other persons. If it was their intention to treat us in a hostile manner, there was no way for us to escape.
And here, Carl Bodmer drew the 2 principal chiefs of the tribe, Mexacuhustan and Natosha. And they were great and proud and strong men. Their job was to protect the tribe and to lead it. And this is the first time I have met our earliest ancestors that we can see on a face-to-face basis.
Iron That Moves was one of the many warriors who boarded the keelboat and one of the principal causes of concern, as he had threatened to shoot the superintendent of Fort Mackenzie the year before. But he was most friendly to Maximilian and Bodmer.
So a combination of the journals and the visuals was just incredibly attractive and meaningful to me. And I'm sure that it did to all the other Indian people that are aware of the works of Carl Bodmer and the Prince.
In this singular company, we began to pass through the most interesting part of the whole course of the Missouri. Here on both sides of the river, the most strange forms are seen. And you may fancy that you see colonnades, pulpits, organs with their pipes, old ruins, fortresses, castles, churches with pointed spires. And a painter who had leisure might fill a whole volume with these original landscapes. As proofs of this, we may refer to some of these drawings which Mr. Bodmer sketched very accurately.
Fort McKenzie, the westernmost outpost of the American Fur Company, had been erected in the previous year.
We approached the landing place and at length set foot on shore amidst a cloud of smoke caused by the firing of the Indians. We were received by the whole population, with the Indian chiefs at their head, with whom we all shook hands.
There were 800 Blackfeet warriors gathered at Fort McKenzie to trade with the Fur Company, to greet Maximilian and Bodmer. Bodmer's careful attention to detail, often missed by the other early Western artists, shows us the varying sizes of the teepees, indicating family size and wealth. The Blackfeet were a nation formed by the Siksika, the Bloods, and the Pagan tribes. Maximilian estimated that the nation must have been 18 to 20,000 strong, since they could bring into the field 5,000 to 6,000 warriors. This pagan man's robe indicates he was most successful in battle, with blood flowing from his enemies, dozens of hoof prints representing stolen horses, as well as guns, bows, and war clubs, all captured from other warriors.
In their domestic life, the Blackfeet, like all North Americans, are quiet and peaceable. They are said, however, to be more aggressive than other nations.
This pagan chief is so plainly dressed because he is in mourning for his dead nephew, who had just been killed by Blood Indians near the fort. He threatened indiscriminate retaliation and revenge, causing much concern. This is the chief's uncle, also in mourning, indicating the depth of his grief by cutting his hair short and smearing it with white clay.
There is no particular marriage ceremony among the Blackfeet. The man pays for the wife and takes her to him. The purchase price is announced to the father of the girl by a friend. If he accepts it, the girl is given up and the marriage is concluded.
The men that Bodmer and Maximilian saw dressed themselves much more elaborately than the women. This pagan warrior, child of the wolf, is bedecked with brass rings, a beaded bib, an impressive bear claw necklace, and is holding an eagle feather fan. The blue dentalium shells in his hair were traded in from Pacific Coast tribes, while the long white ear ornaments were crafted from West Indies conch shells as a cottage industry in New Jersey and brought in as a trade item by the Fur Company.
Many Indians were quite affectionate and embraced the whites. Others were noisy and angry. They are always dangerous to white men hunting in the mountains, especially beaver trappers, and they kill them whenever they fall into their hands. But many tribes fought more with each other than with the whites. On the 28th of August at daybreak, we were awakened by musket shots. When we entered the courtyard of the fort, all of our people were in motion, and some were firing from the roofs. On ascending, we saw the whole prairie covered with Indians on foot and on horseback, and they were firing at the fort. About 18 or 20 tents of Blackfeet had been surprised by 600 Assiniboines and Crees. The enemy had cut up the tents of the Blackfeet and discharged their guns and arrows at them and killed and wounded many. 4 women and several children lay dead near the fort. Mr. Mitchell was employed in admitting the Blackfeet women and children who were at the door of the fort when a hostile Indian with his bow bent appeared before the gate and explained, "White man, make room. I will shoot those enemies." This showed that the attack was not directed against the whites, but only against the Blackfeet.
The warriors were everything. War was probably the ultimate aspect of Indian society because it brought the most honor.
A 5th-generation descendant of one of Maximilian's guides, Indian writer and historian James Welch, at the site of Fort McKenzie.
Well, the warrior society was based primarily on gaining honor, gaining respect. Young Indians, it was the only way to become a man. But always it was on a very small scale, as we think of battle today. A large group of warriors might entail 200 to 300 people, and a battle, maybe 20 or 30 people altogether would have gotten killed. So the idea of war wasn't meant to annihilate another group of people.
The structure of Indian society was and still is tribal. There was no national Indian government to formulate and adjudicate laws or offer protection to one tribe against another. So each tribe had to protect itself. The tribal society, the warrior society, was absolutely necessary for survival.
Indians battled with each other over such diverse reasons as territory. It was a very important idea in that you had your territory. You didn't particularly own it, but it was your territory, and it was up to you to patrol the bounds of your territory and to drive out any intruders because they were obviously up to no good.
A tribe might lay claim to hundreds of square miles of their hunting territory, defending it from incursions by other groups, but there were no individual property rights.
The Indian people believed that this land was everybody's, that there was no ownership, and you could not own a piece. There's no way you can own a piece of this ground and call it yours. So it was everybody's, and they believed that the first creator mated all the animals, and especially the buffalo, for the use of the people. The buffalo, or Madu Tahka, we call him, and that's the grandfather, because he's the one that is the strong one. He's the one that's quick, and he's powerful, and he gives us a lot. He gives us food, he gives us clothing, shelter, everything we need we get from the buffalo. And so when the fur trappers first came in, the buffalo hunters, before they start slaughtering, there was no problem at all. There was actually a lot of trade value for both sides, for the Indian and the white side. So when the buffalo start going out very rapidly, when they start killing out the animals, the Indian finally starts seeing a part of them die. But even today, the old folks, they still talk about that. There's still feelings about how they took away the buffalo. Once they took away the buffalo, once that went, then the tribe pretty much culturally started going downhill. When the herds went out, that was more or less the end of the culture as they knew at that time, and the start of a new culture.
Maximilian's original plans were to travel up the Missouri as far as the Rocky Mountains, but in view of the unsettled nature of relations with the Indians, from Fort McKenzie he turned back downriver to winter over at Fort Clark.
We had just turned a point of land and were looking for a sheltered spot for landing when we observed the Mandan village of Mitutang. A couple of women in their round leather boats set out across the river. At no great distance beyond was Fort Clark, which we reached, and we were welcomed on the shore by Mr. Kipp, the director and clerk of the fur company.
Because Kipp was married to the daughter of a prominent Mandan family, Maximilian and Bodmer were welcomed into the family lodge, and so by the entire village population. As a consequence, they were made privy to many unknown aspects of Mandan culture. The high stakes are shrines, wrapped with feathers and sacred offerings. Religion permeated Mandan life as it did with most tribes. These are effigies of the sun and moon, symbolizing two of the most powerful deities, the Lord of life, creator of all things, and the old woman who never dies, who is associated with corn and the buffalo. No major decision or undertaking was made without first invoking the help of a deity. This skull shrine was related to beliefs about the human body after death and was used as a fasting place for those seeking supernatural powers. The Hidatsas and Mandan were divided into age-related societies into which an individual purchased membership, going from one society to the next as he or she grew older. The Buffalo Bull Society was one of the last and most prestigious for Mandan men.
In their dance, they wear the skin of the upper part of the head, the mane of the buffalo with its horns, but two select individuals, the bravest of all, who from then onward may never run from the enemy, wear a perfect imitation of the buffalo's head. On the 7th of March, the Hidatsa Dog Society danced at the Medicine Lodge at Metutank. The four principal dogs wore an immense headdress hanging down to the shoulders composed of raven's feathers, finished at the tips with small white down feathers. In the middle of this mass of feathers, the outspread tail of a wild turkey was fixed. The warriors formed a circle round a large drum which was beaten by 5 men. The dog dancers accompanied the rapid and violent beat with the whistle of their war pipes, then suddenly began to dance.
Today's powwows are the contemporary expression of the earlier ceremonies, with dance competitions, an opportunity to gather with family members who have moved away from the reservations, and to meet other tribes, but also to reinforce the powerful cultural traditions going back hundreds, even thousands of years.
In their dance, the women rock from side to side, always remaining in the same spot. The first day of January set in with increasing cold, which at 8 in the morning was 32 degrees below zero. On the second day, 25 degrees below zero. And on the third day, the mercury sank into the ball and froze. During these days, some of our woodcutters had their noses and cheeks frostbitten. The horizon was hazy. The river smoked. On the 10th of March, 2 engagés arrived with letters and a sledge laden with dried meat. One of these men was blinded by the snow, a circumstance not unusual for this month.
According to the Mandan calendar, March is named as the snow-blind moon, or the moon of the sore eyes.
In our own room, the boots and shoes were frozen so hard we could scarcely put them on. Ink, collars, and pencils were perfectly useless. And though standing close to the fire, they were completely frozen and had to be thawed with hot water.
Provisions grew short. Fresh meat became scarce and then non-existent as the buffalo became harder to find. The diet consisted almost entirely of beans and boiled maize. Maximilian became seriously ill.
During the tedium of my confinement to bed, I was enlivened by the frequent visits of the Indians, and I never neglected my journal, which from fever and consequent weakness was often very fatiguing.
Judging from the symptoms, he was suffering from scurvy. Bodmer, though terribly hampered by the effects of the sub-zero cold on his materials, painted some of his most accomplished and perceptive portraits during this intensely difficult time. Absichte, Great Blackness, a Mandan warrior. Maripahu, Eagle's Beak, wearing pony bead earrings made in Venice. His brother, Masi Karendi, Flying War Eagle, was a member of the band of distinguished warriors who regulated the important affairs of the Mandans. Mahi Nika, Young War Eagle, was, like his brother, a deaf mute. They were industrious hunters who supplied Maximilian with meat during the harsh winter, conversing easily with each other in sign language. His face is blackened in the warrior's fashion to commemorate a recent battle with the Assiniboines. Arihirish, Pathfinder, and Biroka, both Hidatsa. Arihirish was a respected Hidatsa chief, member of the tribal council, and impressive warrior. Biroka was a man of obvious substance with a beautifully decorated robe. The sunburst pattern represented the feathered bonnet of the accomplished warrior. His painted hat was made from the hide of the prized white buffalo. Yellowfeather, a young Mandan warrior, was fascinated by Bodmer's paintings and asked the artist to decorate his war shield with a bird and to give him a copy of this painting. Yellowfeather also asked for art supplies of his own, and this is one of the many paintings he produced. Another Mandan, a great chief and warrior, Mantotop, Forebears, was also an enthusiastic painter. He represented his battle exploits by painting his body, his clothing, and this buffalo robe. Maximilian wrote that no Mandan chief had more heroic accomplishments than Mantotop. He was one of Maximilian's most informative and accurate sources of information about the culture of the Mandan, spending many hours with him describing the complex Mandan ceremonies and tribal life. And judging from his writings, Maximilian developed a relationship with Mantotop that transcended that of anthropologist and informant and ripened into friendship.
He has been so often noted in my narrative that I must here insert a few words respecting this eminent man. For he was fully entitled to this description, being not only a distinguished warrior, but possessing many fine and noble traits of character.
3 years after Bodmer painted this striking portrait, Mantotop died of smallpox, brought upriver by white traders. Horribly disfigured by the disease, he saw his death as ignoble, his life as wasted. He died embittered and disillusioned by the white man's abuses and broken promises. His last words to his tribe were recorded.
I have been in many battles and often wounded, but the wounds of my enemies I exult in. But today I am wounded by those same white dogs that I have always considered and treated as brothers. I do not fear death, my friends. You know it. But to die with my face so rotten that even the wolves will shrink with horror from seeing me and say to themselves, that is Fort Bears, the friend of the whites.
Maximilian and Bodmer visited the villages along the upper Missouri at a pivotal time in history. A few years earlier, and they would not have met the Blackfeet, who had only recently begun trading with the American Fur Company. And at a particularly poignant coincidence of time for the Mandan and Hidatsa. A month after their departure from this Mandan village near Fort Clark, the Sioux attacked it, and the neighboring Hidatsa village, destroying them both. Only a handful of the inhabitants survived. And the smallpox scourge that killed Mantotop carried away virtually all of the Mandans and decimated the other tribes along the upper Missouri. Maximilian, the aristocratic German with all the prejudices and conditioning of his social class, was able to gain the trust and comradeship of literally hundreds of Indians. Bodmer, youthful, inexperienced, developed into a masterful portraitist and landscape painter with obvious empathy for the people he painted. His drawings, watercolors, and aquatints give us today a profoundly moving yet highly accurate account of the American frontier of the 1830s and of its diverse human population. Today, this priceless collection of Bodmer's paintings and Maximilian's journals are at the Joslin Museum's Center for Western Studies in Omaha, just a few miles from where Major Doherty's Indian Agency and Cabinet's trading post on the Missouri River once stood. It has come full circle, back to the people and the land that inspired its creation.
Like a dream, these marvelous figures drift past the view of the astonished traveler. Only by sketching the most striking ones do they later still survive in the rewarding recollection of this distant, forgotten world.
It is the custom of my people, when you receive a great gift from someone, and the works of Prince Maximilian and Karl Bodmer are great gifts, that we must give the gift back. I'm not an artist or anything else, but I will give a gift back that is customary with us. And this is a song. This is a brave heart honor song that was probably sung when the Prince and Karl Bodmer came up this river, and I will sing it again over 150 years later in their honor, and I give it to them.
La 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 la.